welcome back to my channel. I do a lot of DIY projects, home projects, macrame. I'm getting ready to have a baby in like 3 days, so some of my videos are all about that. If you're interested in any of that, please make sure you subscribe. If you're here because you stumbled upon my chalk paint video about my kitchen cabinets, my 2-year update, I have created this video because of that video. I received so many questions on that video about chalk paint that I thought it was time that I answered all of them. Well, not all of them, but most of them. Some of them are kind of crazy and bizarre, but a lot of them are really good questions, and they're things that I have wondered myself about chalk paint early on when I first started using it, and just throughout my chalk paint journey. I just want to say that I am not a pro. I am not certified in any way. All of my chalk paint knowledge comes from my own experience, my own trials and errors, and my own research that I've done. I've been using chalk paint for, I would say, probably 5 years, and I've chalk painted a lot of different types of surfaces and things, different types of furniture, and I've definitely had my challenges with it, and I've also had my victories with it. And so I'm here to share with you what I have learned about chalk paint, and hopefully I can help answer any questions that you have about chalk paint. So in reference to chalk paint brands, there are many brands of chalk paint out there now, especially because Annie Sloan brand is quite pricey. A lot of brands have come out with their own cheaper versions of chalk paint. You can find it at Home Depot now, you can find it at Lowe's. I have used a lot of different types of chalk paint, especially when I first started using chalk paint and I thought the Annie Sloan brand was too expensive. I tried to go the cheap way, and I have learned that the only brand of chalk paint that I really like and think works well, does what I want it to do, and is worth the money is Annie Sloan brand chalk paint. So that is what I'm talking about today. I'm not talking about any other brand of chalk paint. I don't think they work very well. I have had huge errors with other brands. I prefer Annie Sloan brand, so if you have questions about other brands of chalk paint, you're probably not going to find those answers here. I can answer questions about Annie Sloan because it is what I've had success with, and it is what I prefer to use, what I like. All right, first question on the list is, do I need a primer with my chalk paint? No. No. That is the idea behind chalk paint. You don't need a primer. It sticks to most surfaces, and using a primer kind of defeats the purpose of using chalk paint. I have never come across a project where I personally felt that I needed to use a primer. If you want to use a primer, that is totally up to you. Chalk painting is a very creative technique. Do whatever suits you, do whatever you want. I'm going to tell you what I do and how I prefer to use chalk paint, and I think using a primer is pointless. Do I need to sand first? In most cases, no. The only thing I've sanded before I chalk painted was a piece of furniture that was damaged and the surface wasn't even. And so I filled some of the gaps and holes with wood putty, and then I sanded it to even it out. But typically you don't need to sand. Even my kitchen cabinets, my bathroom vanities that I've painted, they have that really glossy sheen to them. They're like, you know, cheap wood, cheap materials, and they're super glossy. I did not sand them, I did not prime them. I painted them, I cleaned them first, and then I painted them with chalk paint, and I have had 0 issues. Do I have to use Annie Sloan brand chalk paint? No. Like I said, it's what I prefer, but there are tons of brands out there, and if you feel like you want to use a different brand or make your own chalk paint or do whatever you want to do, that is totally fine and totally up to you. I prefer Annie Sloan. I'm not going to waste any more of my money on other brands because I know that Annie Sloan works the way that I want it to. How much paint do I need? I don't know. I get this question all of the time. People ask me how much paint I think that they'll need. I can't see your kitchen cabinets. I can't see the dresser that you're painting. I have no idea. What I can tell you is that on the can of Annie Sloan chalk paint, like this one, it says it's 33.8 fluid ounces. So we have 33, almost 34 ounces of paint, which is about 1 quart of paint. And On Annie Sloan's website, she lists that 1 quart covers about 150 square feet, and that's 1 coat. So you have to take that into consideration. If you have to do math, you have to do math. Luckily, I live in an area where we have a local store that sells Annie Sloan chalk paint, so if I run out, I can go buy it. But if you're not sure and you have to order it, then you're going to have to do the math from there. What I will say about Annie Sloan chalk paint is that a little goes a long way, and you're going to want to mix it with a little bit of water anyway. It comes very thick. I am always shocked at how much coverage I get with this paint. Just completely shocked, especially compared to latex paint. There's also a chart on Annie Sloan's website, which I will link below, that shows a couple examples of pieces of furniture and the amount of coverage that they should receive. What types of brushes and tools do I need to chalk paint? So I have 2 paint brushes here. One is an Annie Sloan paintbrush that I bought. It's the smaller one that she sells. And then I have a regular paintbrush from Home Depot, synthetic bristled paintbrush. This is natural fibers on this brush, the Annie Sloan. I prefer to paint everything with this brush. I love the size. This is a 1.5 inch. It's like the perfect size to paint everything. It's big enough to cover large areas and small enough to get into small little cracks and crevices. And then I only use this to wax. I used to paint with this, but I find that it is very heavy in my hand as compared to this, which is really light. The Annie Sloan, just the shape of it, it being a little bit like a dome, is just really nice to wax with. I feel that the natural fibers really help to get into the paint so that the wax can really cure in there. So you don't need anything fancy when it comes to brushes. You don't even need an Annie Sloan brush. You can wax with a regular brush. You can wax just with your hands, with a cloth. You don't need anything more than a brush like this, which only cost me like, I don't know, maybe $7. How long does it take for Annie Sloan's paint to dry? Somebody asked me that recently, and they asked if they should let it dry for a day. If it needs that long to dry, it's way too thick. I always, when I open my can of paint, I add a little bit of water to it, I close it back up, I shake it, I stir it. As I go, it seems to thicken, so I always add a little bit more water. I think Annie Sloan works best when you use very thin coats of paint and you add water to it. That's when I get my best results. The first coat never looks good. It's always crazy. I just slap it on. It's very gappy. It's very just wild looking. And then once you put the second coat on, it really starts to come together. And I think the mistake that most people make when they paint with chalk paint is they try to make that first coat perfect, and it's too thick. It's way too thick. It takes way too long to dry, and that's where you're going to get issues with peeling or running and things like that. So keep that in mind. Add a little bit of water. Don't worry about what your first coat looks like. Just slap it on. Should I use wax on my painted furniture? Wax is a sealant. Annie Sloan makes wax. I love it. I've used it on several pieces of furniture. I think it's great. She makes clear wax and she makes a dark wax. You can also mix your paint colors in with your wax to create a tinted wax. It's amazing. The wax is mostly matte. It has like a very light sheen to it. I love the texture of it. I have used it pretty much on everything that I've chalk painted except for my kitchen cabinets, where I used lacquer, and I will explain that in a minute. So the next question is, can I use polyacrylic? Can I use polyurethane? Can I use lacquer over chalk painted furniture? And the answer is yes. Polyurethane does have a tendency to yellow over time, and so if you have something that's light in color or that you don't want to add a yellow tint to it, then I would suggest using polyacrylic. I also am very, very keen on the Annie Sloan lacquer. It used to be called floor lacquer, now it's just Annie Sloan lacquer. This stuff is very similar to polyacrylic. I personally prefer the Annie Sloan brand, even though it's pricier, because I just think it works better. It's just a very smooth finish, and you can layer it really, really nicely. You can do 2 or 3 coats, and it doesn't feel like you have 2 or 3 coats of it on there. I just prefer it. I like it. I recommend it. It's worth the money. What makes chalk paint different from regular paint? And I think when most people are asking about regular paint, they're asking about latex paint. A lot of people use latex paint on furniture, on kitchen cabinets, that's totally fine. I think that I have a risk of it peeling. You have to sand most of the time, you have to prime, and then it still could peel. I haven't had good luck using latex paint on furniture. I have always had good luck using chalk paint on furniture. That's pretty much all I can say about that. What makes it different is the texture. Chalk paint tends to be a little bit more on the matte side. It is a completely different type of paint. The texture is just completely different. I don't really know how to explain it. The ingredients are different, the texture is different. This is a different type of paint, and it's what I prefer to use. What sorts of finishes will wax have versus using poly or using lacquer? The finish on wax is a little bit more soft. Even though it cures and it's hard, it's a little bit softer and a little bit more velvety than using poly or using the lacquer. And in my opinion, I would use wax in most cases. The only place I would not use wax would be in my kitchen, because I have white cabinets and I used the lacquer on them, and I feel that the wax can be a little bit porous still. So if I were to get spaghetti sauce or something like that on the cabinets, it would clean off with the lacquer a little bit easier than it would if I had waxed the cabinets. Now, if you get something on a piece of furniture that's been waxed, you can use wax to remove the stain. So you'd have to like reapply the wax, and it usually lifts the stain out. Doesn't always work, but I have had issues with makeup vanity. I got makeup all over it. It was a wax piece of furniture, and it was just really hard to get all of the makeup out. So if it's a place where you know you're going to have spills, or you're going to have a lot of water or anything of that nature, I don't think wax is the #1 choice in that situation. Can I paint over something that has been waxed already? I would not recommend it. I would recommend removing the wax either with mineral spirits or sanding it down before you repaint your piece of furniture. If it's something that you've polyed or used lacquer over, you're gonna have better luck with it sticking, but you have to also think about your layering all of these paints and sealants and all of these things on top of one another. It tends to get a little bit thick. In most cases, I would say it's going to look best if you remove everything, all of the wax or sealant and all of the paint, sand it down, and kind of start over fresh, but it really just depends on what you're doing. What do I do if I'm painting something and the grain starts to raise? This happens on older furniture oftentimes, or in really humid areas. If you live somewhere that's really humid, the grain can raise. It happened to a friend of mine on her oak cabinets. Her house was a little bit older. She had the original oak cabinets in there. When she started to paint, the grain started to raise and swell, and she could see the grain through the paint, and sometimes it looks a little orangey. The only thing you can really do about that is take a really, really fine piece of sandpaper and sand that grain down. You don't want to sand it too much. There's kind of a sweet spot if you're having that issue. Sand it down just a little bit, and that usually does the trick. What can I use to clean something that's been chalk painted? I would use a mild detergent. I would not use anything abrasive. I know in my chalk paint video about my cabinets, I use a Mr. Clean Magic Eraser. I still use the Mr. Clean Magic Eraser every now and then on things that I really just cannot get out with soap and water, but it's kind of a last resort tool. So I would stick with soap and water, very, very mild detergents, nothing abrasive, nothing that's like a grease cutter or anything of that nature, nothing with ammonia in it. Can I use chalk paint in a paint sprayer? I would not waste my money. That's all I'll say about that. If you're using any Sloan brand, I would not put it in a sprayer. A sprayer tends to waste a lot of paint. Unless you're somebody who is like selling chalk painted furniture and you're always using the same color, then that might be a quicker step for you. But if you're like me and you're just painting your furniture or things that you come across, things that you like, things in your house, I think you would waste a lot of paint if you used a paint sprayer. Can I paint my walls with chalk paint? I, for one, would not. The same reason why I would not put Annie Sloan in a paint sprayer. But I did see on her website that she recently came out with wall paint. I don't think people are really looking at walls the way they are furniture. So if it were me, I would just buy matte flat wall paint from Home Depot or Lowe's, and that's what I would use. I've never seen Annie Sloan's chalk paint on a wall, and I've never seen her wall paint, so maybe there's a huge difference and it's worth the money, but personally I don't know that I would invest that much money on my walls. Do I need to sand between coats? You can, and I have on a couple things. If I want a really smooth finish and I don't want to see any brush strokes, then I will sand in between my coats of paint. I hope that I have answered most of the questions that you guys have about chalk paint. Like I said, it's a very creative thing using chalk paint, and it is whatever you want. If you want to distress, if you want to mix colors, I love mixing colors when it comes to Annie Sloan. I will say one last thing. She recently came out with Original White, which is like, I was so happy when I saw this color because it is old white mixed with pure white. And if you've watched my 2-year chalk paint video, you'll know that that was the mistake that I made when I painted my cabinets. I used pure white. I should have mixed it with old white. If you look on Annie Sloan's website, when she talks about the color pure white, it is her most translucent paint. It is definitely something that I would use to mix with other colors to lighten them. It is very translucent. It requires a ton of coats. I should have mixed old white and pure white, and I didn't. It's a mistake that I made, and I learned something from it. But now I don't have to buy pure white and old white to get the perfect white that I want, because her new color, Original White, is that color. It's perfect. If I left anything out and you have any additional questions, please feel free to leave those in the comment box below. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you on my next project.